Greetings, students, and welcome to this lecture in which we are going to cover chapters 7 through 8. So we'll finish off the perfect tense. We'll learn those last few forms, and then we're also going to talk about subject pronouns. Again, I've combined these two lectures because I think there are some benefits, just pedagogically from a teaching perspective, in combining the two, and I will make explicit when I think those connections are, where those connections are, and how I think they can help you out. So here are the focus questions for the day. What are the subject pronouns in Hebrew? So when I say subject pronouns, I'm referring to things like I, you, she, he, we, you, they, whatever. And those then would be subjects for, for verbs, for example. You walked to the city. We ate a meal, things like that. So we need to know what those pronouns are because, of course, they are going to be the subjects of many nouns as we look through the biblical materials. Excuse me. Focus question number 2, how does one recognize the rest of the Hebrew perfect tense verbs? And so first and second, singular and plural. We have been focusing mainly on the third person. These chapters will introduce us to the others. Okay, let's begin with subject pronouns. Here is a chart, as you can see, of subject pronouns, and we have focused here in the blue area on the third person ones, and so these should look somewhat familiar. But basically the chart, which is also available in your book, this is really something that you should memorize. You should be able to recognize on the spot when you're looking at a pronoun like ani or anochi. You'll notice that there are actually two forms here, two versions. That's true also of heim and hema. So you should be able to recognize these pronouns on the spot. So I highly urge you to make sure you drill with these in terms of flashcards. Make sure you are able to recognize them relatively easily because these are extremely important. They show up everywhere. And you'll notice that the two columns are divided. We have singular on the right, and then we have plural on the left. But each of the rows lines up. Corresponds with person, right? So these are all the first person pronouns, ani, anochi, and then anachnu, that's we. And then we have second person masculine singular, ata, that's you, referring to a masculine subject. And then atem, referring to second person masculine plural, you all, or you guys, I guess quite literally, right? Second person feminine singular, at, right? The shva is silent. That can sometimes be a little bit confusing, but the shva is silent, and it is at, so that's how you say it. That's second person feminine singular, you, referring to a singular feminine subject. So, for instance, if you were talking to a woman named Sarah, you would use at to refer to you. Now, if you were working with a group of females, you would use you would refer to them presumably as aten, second feminine plural. Now, I do want to say it's worth noting that when Hebrew addresses a group of mixed gendered persons, meaning males and females, then they will use atem as a default. They will use the masculine as a default. So, but aten would be reserved for a feminine. Plural feminine groups, so groups of women, groups of females, more than one. Okay, so that takes care of all the second person material. Now, I want you to notice something. This helps me to remember. Notice how there are tavs in the second place in each of these pronouns. Notice the tav there? You can hear it. Also, ata, atem, at, aten. What helps me to remember these is that the T's are for twos. T's are for twos. In other words, T is for second person, right? T's are for twos. That helps me remember a little bit these second person pronouns. It just makes it a little bit clearer to me. Now, the third person pronouns, these we are already somewhat familiar with. Third masculine singular, he, you say who. Now, this is very confusing. Beware. How do you say she in Hebrew? Well, you say it as he. So who is he and he is she is this little mnemonic that I remember. Who is he? And he is she. Okay? A little bit confusing. Just remember the little mnemonic there. Who is he and he is she, and you will be golden, good to go. Okay, now let's look over at the third person plurals. Heim and heima, which is a third masculine plural, they. Okay, so third person referring to them or to them, they as a subject. They went to the store. They read the Torah. Whatever, you get the idea. Heim and heima. Now, for third person feminine plural, they, heina. So the difference here is in the noon. The difference is in the noon. Now you'll notice one similarity with another kind of connection within these pronouns is that all the third persons begin with he. So hu, he, hema, hena. And you'll notice again that heim and hema there are basically two different forms for that. So just be aware that there's no real pattern or rhyme or reason why one will be chosen over the other. You just have to be prepared for both. In the same way that ani and anochi are both used. So, okay, those are the subject pronouns. Now, let's we'll return to reading some sentences with subject pronouns. But before we do that, I want to finish off here the pa'al pattern or stem. This is the verbal pattern that we have been learning. This is not going to matter until the very end of the semester, but Hebrew has multiple verbal stems. The most basic one, we call it the Grundstamm in German, like the basic stem, is called the Pa'al, or sometimes called the Kal. Perfect. I will generally use Pa'al. That's the term that I prefer. Don't worry about it if that's a little confusing to say that they have verbal stems. You might be thinking, what on earth does that even mean? It won't even really make sense until probably the last third of the semester when we'll deal with additional verbal stems. I just want to flag it for now, and then I'll remind you of it later. But we're going to be kind of finishing the last part of the perfect. So here we are. Here is the entirety of the Pa'al perfect, a declined verb, a chart of the Pa'al perfect, and from first person all the way down to third person, and singular and plural. So we have singular here on the right, okay, and then we have plural here. Plural here on the left. Just like we did with the pronoun chart. Now, one of the things I love about this book is that when they give you charts like this, decline charts. When they decline a verb, they will put the endings and the vowels. In other words, the non-root components of the verb, they will put them in this kind of highlighted way, or in kind of an empty way, right? They'll just have the outline of the letter. So we have shamarti. Now you'll notice, see that little caret right there? You all will probably remember that Hebrew generally puts the accent on the very last sound. So normally Hebrew would say shamarti, but occasionally they will make exceptions to that. And when exceptions are made, your book kindly gives you this little caret to tell you that this should not be read shamarti, it should be read shamarti. So you'll notice that caret exists in a couple of different places. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not a huge deal, but it is something to keep in mind that generally, right, and this is something we've learned already, generally the accent in Hebrew goes on the very last syllable. That's very helpful in terms of remembering. But occasionally you'll get the accent placed in different places, so no big deal there. Okay, so here are your endings. Shamarti, right? Shamarta, shamart. This one can be a little bit, second feminine singular can be a little bit strange to pronounce, right? Because you have these two shvas at the end. So the way to pronounce it is shamart. So just let that R roll right into the T. Shamart. Shamart. Okay, and again, the accent is changes. And shamar, this is one we know. We've seen it already. He guarded. And then shamra, she guarded. This is what I recommend. You don't need to memorize this chart for every single verb that you know. That would be ludicrous and certainly not possible, or even reasonable to ask you. With that said, I encourage you to memorize this chart for this one verb, so that it'll be a kind of paradigm verb for you. And most especially, I would say, learn to recognize these endings, because in the perfect, all of the endings go on the back end, right? On the back end of the verb. When we turn to things like imperfects then things are and imperfects, that's going to change a little bit, and we're going to start to get a bunch of stuff here on the right hand side. But for now, when we're dealing with the perfect, all of these suffixes, all of these endings are going to be at the very end of the word. Now, just as a reminder, the Hebrew verbal system is generally built off of three-letter roots, verbal roots. So we have here shin mem resh carried through in all of the different forms. Okay, that's why I encourage you. In the initial chapters, the book gives you the third masculine singular form here, he guarded, and it encourages you to remember it that way. As we move through the book, they are only going to give you the root letters. I encourage you to memorize only the root letters, because, as you can tell, shamar, this verb, can be inflected in a whole bunch of different ways, right? Depending on what the ending is and depending on what the vowels are. And so if you are memorizing the third masculine singular form, shamar, I think you are actually going to be impairing a bit your ability to learn. Learn these as roots and not as a particular inflected form. And that will just make it your transition to reading things like Shmaratem a little bit easier, because you'll be saying, okay, I recognize this ending. Let me try and reconstruct the root from there. Because keep in mind, right, they highlight or kind of give you these empty letters at the end. But when you're reading the Bible or reading your textbook, it's all going to be one big word. And part of your role in reading is going to be to separate endings from the root. That's going to be a key part of how you read Hebrew. So now what I want to do is I want to go to the next slide. And this is a chart, again, from your book that shows both the pronouns along with their corresponding verbal forms. Now, why am I doing this? Now I'm going to signal the reason why I like to teach these chapters together. And that is because oftentimes the pronoun, recognizing the pronoun and knowing the pronoun, will also help you know the ending of the verb in the all perfect, really in all the perfect. So let me just tell you what I mean. Let's look first at ani or anochi, right? This is the first common singular, common because it's used for both genders, first common singular pronoun, and it means I, basically. It's common, right? So either a woman could say this, Sarai could say this, Avraham could say this, or Avram can say this, Isaac can say this. It doesn't matter. It works for all genders. So I am going to do something, and then we have shamarti, I guarded. So sometimes Hebrew does not always include the pronoun in the sentence, and sometimes it will simply include the verb here, shamarati. It will simply include the verb because the pronoun's already in there, right? So if you have the addition of a pronoun, then it's somewhat redundant. In both cases, it means I guarded, shamarati. So notice here the similarities between the pronouns and the verbal endings. So in this case, both of them end with hirek and yod. Shamarti, anochi. They both end with the e. So that is one thing that can help you. So what I highly encourage you to do is to go through this chart and look for similarities. I'm going to do that right now, but you should also do it yourself. So we have here ata. And notice that ata ends with ta in the same way that this verb also ends with ta, right? And similarly with at, shamart also ends with the tav and the shva, okay? This is not so much the case for who and he. You're not going to be helped by connections there. But let's go back up to anachnu and shamarnu. Notice that they both end with nu, right? They both end with nu. Similarly here, tem, ten, and then the thirds. So in other words, with the thirds, these connections between pronoun and ending are really not there. But when it comes to first and second, I think it's actually pretty helpful and pretty clear. So in other words, the reason I'm showing you this is to say that when you are practicing your pronouns, you are also to some degree practicing your verbal endings. To study one is to reinforce the other, at least in the case of the first person and second person singulars and plurals. Okay, does that make sense? So it could be useful for you to create a separate flashcard pile in which you have both the pronouns, this stuff right here, and this stuff right here, and your paradigm verb, shamar, and you have it all mixed up. and you just go through those flashcards together because they will reinforce one another. Like I said, at least in the first person and the second person. So that's what, again, this is why I'm teaching these together. Let's see. And now, let's see. What am I doing here? Okay. So, the reason I have this additional slide is just because the chart here below highlights those endings a little bit more, so it can just be a little bit easier to see where the connections actually are. Okay? Just additional material for your study. Let's do some practice sentences. How about that? Now, the way I want to do this is I am going to read these out loud in Hebrew a couple times because, like I said, it's very important for me that you are able to read. Not read in a perfect way. Most people stumble through the reading throughout the semester because it's really hard. There are a couple things, couple factors that make it difficult. One is that we're reading from right to left. That's already a disadvantage for those of us, at least, who work in languages that read from left to right normally. So that's one challenge. The other is just these letters are weird. They're not, like in Greek where the letters sort of approximate the alphabet that's used in the English language. So there are a lot of things working against you to make it difficult, but we're going to practice it anyway. So I'm going to read these out loud a few times slowly so you can try to do it yourself. I'm going to pause, give you a chance to translate here on the video, and then I will offer the proper translation. Okay. Ani amadti lifnei hahar. Ani amadti lifnei hahar. Okay. Ani amadti lifnei hahar. All right, let's go back to here. What is ani? How would you translate this? Ani amadti. I stood. I stood. So here's your verb, right? Ayin, mem, dalet has to do with standing. The T, you recognize that T ending? First person, right? First person right here. Or we'll look at this one. Whoops. First person right here. Okay. Ani amadti lifnei. Okay, so I stood. Now, this sentence could work with or without this pronoun. This pronoun ani could be there, and you'll notice we'd still know it's I stood, right, because of the T at the end. So the ani is in some ways redundant. I stood. Lifnei means before or in front of. Can also have a temporal kind of sense, like before in terms of time, right? But in this case, it's locational. Hahar. Any guesses here? Ha-har. Well, the hey, here's a definite article, right? And then har is the word for mountain. I stood before the mountain. You can even properly translate this as I stood in front of the mountain to make it a little more colloquial. Okay, good. Good job. Hopefully that went well for you. If this did not go well for you and you don't know why, it would be a great time to text your professor and say, I have no idea how you got from here to the translation. That would be a good thing to do. Next sentence. Shalach ha-melech lechem el ha-eved. Okay, I'm going to read that one more time and then I want to make an observation. Shalach ha-melech lechem el ha-eved. Okay. You may have noticed there were some weird pronunciation issues going on there. Notice where the accent lands when I read these next two words. Ha-melech lechem. The accent actually goes at the front of these words. Melech lechem. Whenever you see this cluster of two segol vowels. Segol are the vowels that are these like the three dots right here. Whenever you see them clustered together, this is telling you visually that the accent is actually going to go on the front one. So it's not ha-melech, which you might expect, right? That it would go on the last syllable. It's ha-melech lechem ha-eved. So whenever you see this configuration where you have two segols right next to one another, then you want to put the accent on the front. This is something we'll practice and reinforce throughout the semester. No big deal. So let me read it one more time. Shalach hamelech lechem el ha'eved. Okay, that's what it all sounds like. All right, let's go back. Which one? Let's start with this question. Which one of these words is the verb? Let's start there. Well, let's start by eliminating some things. First of all, we notice that a number of these words have definite articles in front of them, like ha'eved or ha'melech. That's going to tell us that those are probably not verbs. Let's X those out, right? Those are nouns. We have here a preposition, el, which means to. So in other words, that one is not a verb. And then we have this word right here, lechem. If you remember it from your vocab, you'll remember this is bread. So that leaves us only with one of the words in the sentence, and that is in fact the verb. Notice also the vowel configuration, shalach. Notice how similar it is. Shamar. Or actually, in this case, it's third person, right? Notice the vowels are the same in shamar, same as here, shalach. That won't always be the case. Vowels are going to change for a whole variety of reasons, but in this case it works for us, so we'll take it. This is the verb for send, having to do with sending. So he sent. Who sent? Hamelech, the king. What did he send? Lechem, bread. El, to the servant. The king sent bread to the servant. There you go. How'd you do? If you didn't do well, reach out to me. Yashavta al habehema hayom. Now a little bit slower. Yashavta al habehema hayom. Last time, super slow. Yashavta al habehema hayom. Okay, where's your verb? Here's your verb, right here. Yashavta. Okay, you'll notice the ending, right? So here's another question for you, another little quiz before we move on. How would you parse this out? Yashavta. Is it first, second, or third person? Remember the clue that I told you. T's are twos, right? This is second person. Happens to be masculine singular. Look. You guarded, masculine singular. Same ending. You, in this case, it's you dwelled or you sat. Sat is probably the better one. Yashavta, you sat al, this is a preposition, upon, on or upon. Habehema, habehema is the word for beast or cattle. So you sat upon the beast. And then what about hayom? Well, we have a definite article there. And then the noun itself is yom. When Hebrew says hayom, literally the day, that's how they say today. This is how Hebrew says today, is it says hayom. So, altogether, you sat on the beast or the animal today, hayom. Literally the day, right? But that's how they idiomatically say today. Okay, let's go back and let's go ahead and read this fourth sentence here. Shamarnu durachim mehe'arim leharim. Shamarnu durachim mehe'arim leharim. One more time slowly. Shamarnu durachim mehe'arim leharim. Okay, so that's our sentence. Now, there are a lot of long words in there, right? Look how much longer these words are. So part of what you need to do is you need to figure out what your best entry into the sentence is. This is a question I like to ask students. What do you recognize? What's one thing that you might recognize from this sentence? Now, maybe all you recognize is the new ending, and you might say, oh, I recognize this because look, we just looked at this chart, shamarnu, and I recognize the new. It means we. Great, that's a really good place to start. You recognized the ending for we guarded. Okay, that's what the root shin mem resh means. Has to do with guarding. So we guarded. Maybe that's all you recognize. Maybe you recognize the prepositions in here. The mem attached to whatever this noun is, and then the lamed attached to whatever this noun is. Maybe you recognize the eames. Notice all these eames. Durachim, mehe'arim, leharim. You can hear it even a little bit more effectively when you say it out loud. You can hear the pattern. So you might say, "Oh, I recognize these eames, right?" These eames have to do with whoops, I don't have that slide. Sorry. These eames have to do with masculine plural, right? We learned about plural nouns just recently. So maybe that's what you recognize. It doesn't matter what you recognize. Go with what you recognize at first, and that will help build a little bit of confidence and help you get into the sentence. So, all right, here's our verb. We guarded. And what did we guard? Dorachim. This is from the word derech, which has to do with a road or a path or a way. Dorachim, but this is the plural form, right? So the vowels have changed, plus that we have a new ending on it. So we guarded roads or ways or paths. And what did they guard from? Mehe'arim, or what did they guard? They guarded the roads, and then we're going to give some other information about kind of how they guarded, or more precisely where they guarded. Mehe'arim, what do you make of this word? What do you see there? What needs to be kind of removed so you can understand what's going on? Well, the first thing to notice is that there's a preposition on front. Min, which means from. The mem preposition means from. And then we also, in addition to the preposition, we have something else added. It's the definite article. Wow, so we're adding a lot of stuff to this word, right? We have a preposition mem. We have the definite article hey. So from the, that's literally what we've got so far. Then from the what? Arim, from the cities. Plural because of the im. From the cities, le harim, to, lamed means to, the mountains. From the cities to the mountains. So this is a very difficult sentence. And if you had challenges there, you should let me know through email or text or reach out to me if you are having difficulties understanding how you maybe misinterpreted that sentence. But that is admittedly a very difficult sentence. There is a lot going on there. But welcome to the world of learning Hebrew. It's certainly going to be challenging. So those are just some practice sentences. And now let's do a little bit of parsing practice. Parsing practice. What do I mean by that? When we say parsing, what we're talking about is putting a verb in front of us and indicating its gender, number, and person. So gender, masculine or feminine, number, right? Is it singular or plural? And person, meaning is it first, second, or third? So let's look at the verb shamar. This is a verb that we are now very well acquainted with. We've seen it a billion times over at this point. What is its gender, number, and person? Okay, gender, shamar, is masculine. And then what is its number? Is it singular or plural? It's singular, right? There are no endings indicating that it's plural. And then it is a third person, meaning he. So to parse this, we would say third masculine singular, all perfect. Okay, that's what the shamar is. Third masculine singular, all perfect. All right, let's look at a different one. Again, using shamar as our paradigm verb. Shamarnu, shamarnu, shamarnu. Again, remember, just as a reminder, the accent for the first plural comes above the mem. Shamarnu. So, I just gave it away, right? This is a first common plural because of the nu. Perfect. First common plural. Let's do another one. Halachti. Halachti. All right? What do you think? What is it? How would you parse this out? What's gender, number, and person? Well, the gender is actually common, right? It's first person. That's the first clue. We have the T, the E at the end, T ending. First person, and the first persons are always common, right? Both masculine and feminine subjects may use the first person without any change in the ending. So, first person, is it singular or plural? It's singular. And is it masculine or feminine? We already answered that question. It's common. First common singular, all perfect. Halachti, I walked, is what it means. Let's do one more. Shmartem, okay? So we have our root letters here, shin mem resh, with the ending tem. So how would you parse this out? What's the gender? Masculine or feminine? Well, here's a little clue that I forgot to mention. When it comes to these second persons, the mem endings often point to masculine item. So, or another way to say it is that mem refers to many men. Okay, so this is a plural, masculine plural. So the mem endings often point toward masculine subjects. So, tem, this is second masculine singular because it's second because t's are twos, right? This is a tav. Second person masculine plural, pa'al perfect. Okay. So that's just a little bit of parsing practice, okay? Here's one more. Malachta, malachta, second masculine singular perfect, right? There's the tav, t's for twos, It's singular and it's masculine. Go back and check your charts if that's not clear. Shalcha, 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 third feminine singular perfect. Third feminine singular all perfect. Okay, we have the different vowel configurations plus, of course, the addition of the ah at the end. This hey is not part of the root. The root letters are shin, lamed, chet. Then finally, shma 10. Oh, I jumped the gun on that. Shma 10. So we have the 10 ending, right? T's are twos, second person. The noon points not to a masculine subject, but to a feminine one, in fact. So you all, feminine subjects, you all, maybe referring to women, you women heard something. Second feminine plural perfect. So, okay. Now, that's all the stuff I want to talk about in terms of these perfect verbs. Review before we jump into the matrix. Review these charts. You want to have at least one paradigm verb memorized. Now, as Morpheus is about to indicate, what happens when the last letter of the verbal root is a hey? Okay, we are, as the image indicates, about to go down the rabbit hole a little bit of Hebrew verbs. We're delving a little bit into what we sometimes call weak verbs. Weak verbs. Let me employ a kind of troubling metaphor from childhood. That when we talk about weak verbs, really what we're talking about is verbs that have letters that will change as the verb is inflected. In other words, they get bullied. The letters get pushed around, right? They are weak letters. They get bullied and pushed around a little bit. And verbs that end with hey, excuse me, are very much like that. Especially the final letter often gets transformed. This is all covered in your chapter. I just want to highlight a few things. Here is an example of what I mean. So on the right-hand side, we have our favorite verb, right? Shamar, which isn't fully inflected here, right? Starting with first person, shamarti, and then all the way down to third plural, shamru. Look at what happens with the verb haya, which is the verb to be. Has to do with, being, was, is, that kind of stuff. Notice what happens to the verbal root as it becomes inflected. So we have hayiti. Notice that the hey drops off. Hey drops off here. The ending remains the same, which is helpful for you in terms of memorizing stuff. But the ending remains the same, but the third hey drops off. And what's more, when we get to the third feminine singular, the hey gets transformed into a tav. Haita. Then the hey drops off again. So it's only in this third feminine form that the hey gets transformed into a tav, but worth noting nonetheless. This is our first dip of the toe into weak Hebrew verbs, and it's important that they do it with haya because this is such a common verb. It's important that you begin to see and just begin to recognize that when we have these weak verbs, we are going to have some problems. So, and in particular, where you're going to have consonants that drop out, and sometimes vowels change in some strange ways. But this is our first introduction to it. We have a lot more information to talk about with regard to these weak verbs, but just something to note. I do think it's useful to do some comparison and contrast. Your greatest comfort will be the fact that you still have these endings, right? Notice that the endings are largely the same. You do have a couple weird exceptions. You really just one weird exception, right? With the second feminine singular, where it doesn't end with the shva under the tav, but it simply ends with the tav. So a little bit odd there, but just keep these things in mind. And I do highly encourage you to make some flashcards for haya, just so you can kind of get used to seeing and parsing these verbs, especially the strange ones like haya. So, and then just here are a few things that you will definitely need to study on your own, definitely need to look up on your own in the chapter having to do with negative sentences, the direct object, and the preposition. This lecture really just covered what I think are the most difficult parts of these chapters. So thanks, everyone. This ends the lecture for chapter 7 and 8. I will look forward to chatting with you soon. Thanks again.